All right, everybody. Welcome to the third biennial Food Waste Fair. We have a very exciting panel ready for you today. But first, I wanted to go over a few reminders. For one, we will have an interpreter on in just a sec. 1 second. Let me just promote that one quickly. Clarita will be available in our Spanish speaking channel. So tune into that if you would rather listen to the panel in Spanish. And that's available to you at the bottom of the screen under interpretation. I would also like to remind our attendees of the Food Waste Fair website, foodwastefair.com, where you can check out the schedule for the remainder of the week. And in addition to this panel, we have, I think, 6 more panels, as well as several other workshops for you to attend. So please check that out. And you can also check out the Food Waste Toolkit, which is a guide for residents and businesses to learn about how to reduce their food waste. One last reminder, I would like to point out that we have a Q&A function associated with this webinar, and I highly encourage you to ask questions of our panelists throughout the event, and we will get to those questions towards the end. And with that, I will throw it over to Raj.
Thank you so much, Sam. My name is Borsellino. I'm a senior program officer at the Robin Hood Foundation. I want to give a huge thank you to the Sanitation Foundation for sponsoring this week of events at the Food Waste Fair, and this panel in particular. And a huge thank you as well to our 3 panelists, Desmond, Matt, and Ben, for joining us, for sharing your expertise, your experience, and your vision for this city. So what you're going to hear during the next hour is 3 agencies with different geographic scopes, different histories, and different program models. But really a common thread of lifting up communities to respond to this crisis that we've seen during the past year. And one of the goals of this session is to think through how we can take the response to this emergency and make sure that some of the lessons that have come from it don't fade away. And doing that with a particular lens towards empowering the communities that have been hit the hardest and making sure that this recovery is truly ground up. As Sam said, of course, we also have an audience here, and we want to make sure that you all stay engaged. So we have a list of discussion topics that we'll be going through, but we also do want to make sure that we spend at least 15 minutes at the end responding to questions. So please don't hesitate to use that Q&A function. But to kick it off, would love to hear just briefly from each of the panelists, name and the organization that you represent, what your organization focused on before the pandemic, and then what the past 15 months have looked like for your organization. And I would love to kick it off with Desmond, please.
Sure. Thanks, Raj, for having me. And thank you to the other panelists for sharing the space on this very important topic, and the Sanitation Foundation for lifting it up. So Desmond Lewis, I'm co-founder of the Bronx Community Foundation. We're the first and only community foundation in the Bronx. A proud South Bronx, I should say, born native. The Bronx Community Foundation is a foundation that really focuses on building prosperity in one of the most diverse, dynamic places in the country. The Bronx, according to the 2010 census, is the most diverse place in America. And we have a lot of opportunities in our community, but we equally have the same amount of systemic and institutional challenges, of which food is arguably at the top of that list. We started the foundation several years ago with the focus driven by community ownership, community values, and really what the community said was their priority. And several years ago, as it is today, food remains pretty much near the top. And so the Bronx, according to all statistics around food, has the largest food desert in all of New York City. And so the opportunities for us in the Bronx to focus on things like food waste and other food-related solutions is tremendous. And so really looking forward to talking to you all today about what's happening in the Bronx and around food waste.
Great, thank you so much. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, and thank you, thank you everybody for including us on this. Really appreciate being a part of this group. Big fan of the Sanitation Foundation and everything that they do, and of course with the Food Waste Fair as well. So I'm the founder and CEO of Rethink Food. I founded it in 2017. I was a cook for a really, really long time and noticed a lot of really great food not being utilized. A very simple, a very common story, I think. Rethink started focusing on looking for what community centers actually needed. That was like our main focus. So we say we're like CBO first. We really care about quantity, flavor, like everything that we do. So we used to bring all the scraps of everything that they weren't even scraps. Food waste is not the best term. Brought it all back, excess food. We bring it back all this commissary kitchen in Brooklyn. And then we would cater local community centers, like literally take catering orders. Like, what do you need? How many meals with dietary restrictions? Really with a focus on quality. Then we opened up the Rethink Cafe, which offered low cost, no cost meals in the Clinton Hill community. And when COVID hit, we saw that we had like an obligation to the community centers that we worked with. And it didn't seem to make sense to pack everybody into a small kitchen and try to make food from restaurants and gather food from restaurants that were closing. So we started March, early, like second week of March, we started giving restaurants small grants. And that's really where we saw the success is we were actually trying to cut down on shipping costs. And we noticed that restaurants closer to community centers made more culturally celebrated food that was better received. And so going forward, that will always be a part of our program, which is essentially enlisting small business in the communities that we partner with to cater local community centers in the neighborhood.
Great, thank you. And our third panelist is Ben Collier from the Farmlink project.
Hey there, thank you, Raj. And again, thank you to Desmond and Matt. The Farmlink project, there really wasn't a pre-COVID story for us. I'm a co-founder of the group, and we began last April, largely in response to seeing how much food waste and food insecurity was being talked about due to the pandemic, which we quickly learned neither of which were products of the pandemic. They were merely being highlighted further. And so while Matt addressed that they're focusing on rescuing food at the restaurant level, we focus a little bit further up the supply chain, which is looking at where farms and distribution centers are experiencing surplus and unmarketable produce. So what we do is we connect with those farms directly and help reroute that food from landfills to communities in need around the country. So since last April, we've been able to rescue, I think now, just over 35 million pounds of food. Because we started during the pandemic, we were a digital organization from the start, and it also meant that we could become a national organization from the start. And so it really hasn't felt like we've had any geographic barriers within the country, which has allowed us to really expand and feel like we can cover a lot of ground at a rate that I'm not sure we necessarily would have felt we could have otherwise. But moving into the future, we're really focused on creating an organization that can continue to be run by student volunteers. The average age of the member at Farmlink is 21 years old. So if we can continue to provide this really engaging and hands-on experience for students around the country to be involved with rescuing food, hopefully we can take steps towards improving the system, but we can also provide people the perspective and the tools to move on from Farmlink and continue to think about how they can be making change in both the important food waste and food insecurity spaces.
Great, thank you so much. So one of the things that sort of came through from your initial presentations is that all three of your organizations have a focus on rescuing food that would otherwise go to waste. Obviously, at sort of different steps along the process. Why is that so important? And what are some of the challenges that are associated with rescuing food? Ben, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think the simple and most salient statistic that comes to mind is that 30 to 40% of the food that we grow that is fit for human consumption is going to waste every single year. That's a non-pandemic regular year. So if we're considering that tens of millions of Americans are food insecure, and at the same time, we still are losing that much food because of inefficient food systems, it's a pretty approachable space, or at least one that deserves to be focused on. And so I think that's what brings a lot of us to the table to focus on this issue.
And are there any particular challenges that you've seen in doing this since last April? I mean, 35 million pounds is a lot of food, and I would imagine that there are a lot of logistical hurdles that you've run into.
Absolutely. I mean, 35 million pounds is a lot. It's still just a drop in the bucket. Even at the farm and distribution level, 20 billion pounds are lost every single year. So we're really focusing on ways that we can continue to scale what we're doing, but also ways to recommend change such that more food can be rescued than even goes through the Farmlink project itself. I see Desmond's definitely got a point, so I'm going to pass it over to him. But one of the biggest issues for us is figuring out where that food loss is occurring, where the most aggregated areas where that is, oh my gosh, where that is occurring. And so for us, of that 20 billion pounds, billions of those are left in the field. And if we can figure out a way to harvest that better, that's going to lead to a lot more food in people's kitchens.
Great, Desmond.
Sorry, no, I was for some reason my clicker wasn't working, so I apologize. It looked like I was trying to jump in, but yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Ben. At the Bronx Community Foundation, we distributed over 2.5 million meals last year, and so matching that food rescue to a location is not really that difficult, right? The need is large. It's moving that food and getting that food logistically to the locations is where we're really trying to figure out and really coming up with sort of innovative ways with our partners to figure it out. So I think it is, Raj, to your point, the logistics around it is pretty challenging, and like, where do you store that food? And so I would say it certainly is around logistic at scale, right? The need is so great. And so to Ben's point is really trying to scale up to service the need. And the logistics around that can get quite complicated.
And Matt, I know, and you mentioned this in your intro, Rethink really started by taking items from high-end restaurants, from corporate cafeterias, and you literally sat in a kitchen and created these amazing meals. And over the course of the last couple of years, especially, really scaled in a remarkable way. What have some of the challenges in that journey looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to both the points I just heard, it's difficult. You really have to quantify what the actual end point requires, and I think that always kind of goes out. Like, the thing about community-based organization, Desmond, and as I'm sure you know, and like obviously are part of, and I know we've worked together, is basically like they're a food and beverage business that is doing it for completely free, right? So they need the staff, they need like people there, they need refrigeration. And so when you say like, here's XYZ, or take this and go figure out the rest, it makes it extremely difficult for them to operate these businesses. So I think that what Rethink's trying to absolutely focus on right now is like, we need to have a finite understanding of like what each location needs, what the dietary restrictions are, what the feedback has been on the past meals, and then kind of focus that way to get a better understanding of the network. Because there has to be more or less like a marketplace for food insecure individuals to be able to access, or else everybody's just going to go to McDonald's. And I think the other big problem that Rethink always runs into, and Julie Raskin is here, and I Googled her on the thing, and she'd be mad at me for saying this, but I'm saying, is the word waste is a problem. It's like, if you have a roommate and you're like, hey man, I'm leaving, I'm going out of town for a little bit, like, do you want to eat my food waste? They're going to be like, nah, like, of course I don't want to eat your food waste, it's disgusting. But if you say, hey, I got some leftover pasta and a quart of arugula and some beautiful mushrooms, like, do you want to eat that, or should I throw it away? They're gonna be like, no way, don't throw that away, I want to eat that. And vocabulary and understanding of demand are two things that go totally missed, and I feel like a lot of these discussions that would be really helpful for all of us to really go forward. Food waste is eggshells and peppers, and thank you, Julie, is food waste and eggshells and the tops of peppers and banana peels and things like that you can compost, do something different with. But the food that's coming out of restaurants and farms is so far from waste, it's almost better than the things you can buy at the store.
And I'm so glad you touched on that point around feedback. I think one of the terms that's used a lot in the nonprofit world, not just with respect to food, is community voice. In your day-to-day work, what does community voice look like? How do you make sure that the communities that you're serving are appropriately empowered, that their voices are lifted up? Desmond, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think it's core to have participatory strategies in everything that you do, from as much as you can from beginning to end. And so what that looks like is, decision making in terms of where you source the food. How do you distribute the food? Who receives the food? What funding you're using in order to support that work. I think you have to have community members and community organizers involved as much as possible as a part of every step of that process. And when we started doing that as a beginning of, at the beginning of our organization sort of inception, a lot of people were saying that brings complexity and lack of decision making. And I think one of the things that we saw during COVID is how untrue that is actually, right? And how community members do come together around a cause, and how you can bring a diverse set of voices and community members to the table to ensure that those decisions are rooted in the true needs of our community members.
So I don't want to cut off Ben, but I'm
please
going to respond, because this was just like the eureka moment at Rethink, and it's almost embarrassing how long it took us to get there. But we worked with Deloitte, built this whole system where restaurants could apply and all this stuff, and it was really, really helpful to help us decide what it was. And we still got complaints on food. And then all of a sudden we just started asking the CBOs, and we partnered with the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, and we're like, you select the restaurants. And no questions asked. And they're like, oh, we love this. And complaints went down 20%. It was just made our life so much easier. So anybody who ever says that engaging the constituents complicates it, it just gives the people who are receiving, distributing the food actual accountability in what they've chosen. And they have to own that responsibility. And so it just makes everybody kind of part of a community effort to get things done. So I resonating over here, I'd say.
I appreciate that. And I'm curious, Matt, how you've taken that particular experience and sort of integrated that into your day-to-day work when you're thinking about who to support and how to provide that support.
Well, we look at, we do look at kind of zip codes to help us get a better understanding of where to go. But we built a system with our technology it's not perfect, but it's easy to start, where the community centers are able to actually rate the restaurant orders that they get. So it's like Yelp for food that they're getting. So we can't run around testing all the food, making sure it's up to whatever we decide is right. They have the responsibility to understand and try what's right. And if they say, hey, I really hated this meal, that we're okay, put it in the thing. And then 3 times after they put that in, we'll go have a discussion with the restaurant and say, look, this isn't working. You need to try this and this and this and this. And then we give them another shot. And then if it doesn't change, and we've actually we've only had one instance where we've had to drop a restaurant out of 72, we'll drop the restaurant.
Great. And Matt, or sorry, not, Ben, I know that the sort of the nature of your work is a little bit different in that you're helping transport really substantial amounts of food at a time and doing that across geographic regions. Are there ways in which you're able to incorporate community voice into that work as well?
Absolutely. We have an entire team which is specifically dedicated to connecting with the communities that we're serving and understanding how we might better be able to take care of them. Because the reality is, if a food bank in the Pacific Northwest already has unlimited access to potatoes, getting them more potatoes is not going to do much good. And so while we're not able to necessarily serve meals at an impressive level like Matt's and Rethink Food are, I think what we're trying to do now is understand how we can take feedback from the communities that we're serving to better inform how we're focusing on what we're sourcing. Because the reality is there's so much food going to waste that it could be worthwhile for us to focus on nutrition or a specific type of food that a community otherwise doesn't really have access to, instead of just focusing on the raw bulk total pounds of food we're able to move. So that's one element. And then the other is trying to see in which ways we can support communities by getting people on the ground to support at the food banks that we're serving. We are spread across the country and have had, at this point, I believe about 450 students volunteer for us throughout Farmlink's past 14 months. So if we can continue to have a part of the organization be getting to your local food bank, to the communities that we're serving, and learning from working with them directly, that is a pretty big part of the organization that would otherwise just be behind computer screens.
Great, thank you. One of the things that I know that the philanthropic world is finally sort of coming to terms with, which I candidly think is long overdue, is compensating community members for the time that they put in to provide feedback. It's something that historically has just not been part of the equation. I know it's something that you and I have spoken about, Desmond. Could you say a little bit about how you think through that and why it's so important?
Yeah, and I think this is a topic that's kind of growing, and we're sort of hearing a lot of from our partners, from other organizations in the space. I think it's important to recognize, particularly in communities like the Bronx, the systemic and institutional challenges, and in many cases racist decision-making that's been done in community disenfranchised and underserved communities. And I think for a very long time, organizations have tried to serve those institutions and learn from those institutions in ways that not always, serves the best interests of those institutions. And we as an organization have also learned through that process as well, right? In terms of, whilst, majority of our team, including my brother and I, we are born and raised from the Bronx in the community, there's still a recognition that there are organizations that are doing great work every day on the ground with the knowledge, with the experience that need to be, uplifted and compensated and supported in a way that values that knowledge, that values that experience, and that really values the work that's already being done. And so as an institution, we have gone through a growth phase of learning that ourselves. And it's something that, we, as you mentioned, Raj, we've talked about a lot, that we are now obviously looking to do more of. But I think it's important that in order for systemic change to happen, you have to start off by recognizing that the people who are doing the work and have been doing the work need to be recognized. And in one case is through compensating them, our family members, our friends, our community members for doing the work they're already doing.
And I saw Matt and Ben nodding along as well. Is there anything else either of you has to add?
I mean, that was just like one of the crazy, wonderful, amazing things that I got to learn during COVID, was that, Betty at Betty Park at Man of Soul Food has been literally catering her church like around once a month, always. And so when we were like, we're going to give you money to do it, it was like, really? It was such like a crazy thing, but I feel like 100%, like, I think, not even for the perspective, but for like encouraging positively some of these actions that are going on is really, really, really important. I also think it's important that when, you're asked to, be on a board or be on a panel or be on a thing, or like, it's important, or foundations, when they go out and try to get perspectives and sit people down, like, you definitely need to compensate that person. It really needs to be. I was kind of like shocked, because I'm kind of new to the philanthropy, newish. I mean, Raj and I feel like I've known you for a long time, but like newish to the philanthropy thing. 4 years ago, I was line cooking at 11 Madison. So I always thought that they would do that, but it's different.
If I could jump in too, I think Desmond makes a really important point about systemic change as well, which is that I think for systemic change to occur, people need to understand the scope of the issue in way more detail than my perception is many people currently do, which is that if you look at food insecurity, for instance, a lot of people think, okay, if food banks had enough food, it would all be better. Food insecurity would solve. But the reality is we've settled for a system that does not provide dignified solutions for people to be feeding themselves and their families in to begin with. And in a bigger world, in a better world, people don't even need food banks at all. And when it goes to compensation, that's something that we're trying to do as well, is figure out how we can continue to better support farmers who face a really difficult industry where when food loss occurs, it's usually just a pretty large cost for them. And they might have years out of every single decade where they're not making money at all. And so if we can continue to help farmers alleviate the financial burden for participating in the charitable food space, that's one step that we hope to make towards incentivizing more participation overall.
Great, thank you. And I was planning on holding off some of the audience questions until later, but we just got a couple really fantastic ones. So I'm gonna ask one of them now because it's pretty germane to this conversation. And it is, other than compensation, how else do you ensure that organizations get feedback from a diverse set of voices? And I'll tee that up for whoever would like to answer it first.
At least at Rethink, it's just say in the food. Like, that's it. It's, you get to decide what restaurants are going to come in, what restaurants are going to come out, and give that feedback.
Yeah, I think it's really fundamentally building this into your process. It's not just go and find out and come back and strategize. It's about having, you know, diverse sets of voices at the table as you're designing the solution and executing the solution, and every element as much as you can, right? Yeah, I think it's just making sure you're intentional in doing that. And as I said, you know, our foundation has learned that, and we're continuing to learn how to do that. I don't think there's like a specific right solution for every situation, but we're learning through that process and being educated, most importantly, through that process.
I've also observed that a lot of organizations I've seen try to build a product for farmers to rescue food have failed because they don't even talk to the farmers before building it. And similarly, in building a solution that allows food banks to better have access to food, the same problem occurs. So that's one thing that we're doing, is every step of the way when we try to add a process to what we're doing at Farmlink, we're trying to put it in front of the food banks and the farmers that we'd be serving it to every step of the way, instead of building and then expecting that they'll mold to accommodate it. And I should note, we're compensating them for the time that we're asking of. Another thing we're trying to do is lower the barrier to participating with Farmlink to begin with. So one thing we did was create something we call Power Hour, which is power hours, which are different from what you know in college. It's you join us on Zoom for an hour, and you're going to help us research or reach out to the farmers that we're working with directly. And that's one way that we've been able to engage with a lot of community members throughout the pandemic who just have access to a computer and a phone. And it's been really special to connect with hundreds of people beyond just the people within our organization.
Great. And we also have another question about the role of mutual aid organizations and community fridges in particular. And I know that a couple of you have worked pretty extensively with mutual aid organizations, even though you yourselves are not considered mutual aid. Would anyone feel comfortable sort of giving a sort of a brief overview of what a mutual aid organization is and how it's different from a traditional nonprofit? And also, to get to the question, what the role of mutual aids and community fridge volunteers is in reducing food waste and really creating systemic change. It's one of the things that's really come out of the pandemic. As we've seen, there's been a network of community fridges that have popped up through a really new and innovative and exciting model, and one that really has the potential to scale around the city. Desmond, I know you and I have actually spoken quite a bit about this. Would love to hear a little bit about
Sure.
about how you see their role.
Sure, and appreciate the question. So we see mutual aid organizations as being core. I mean, a vital participant and partner in this work. And I know we've talked about this extensively in the fact that we've obviously gone as far to say it's, you know, it cannot be really successful without mutual aid organizations. And so we truly believe that the grassroots nature, the collaborative nature of organizations participating and supporting mutual aid organizations and mutual aid groups, I should say, you know, are vital to getting truly to the localized nature of what this work really is. And it is grassroots, it's on the ground. And we fundamentally believe you cannot solve systemic challenges like food without having a very, very strong, you know, partnership with mutual aid organizations to solve these needs. And so for the foundation, we believe it's core, it's critical, it's essential, and it is extremely important that you make sure you have those relationships built to be able to solve these systemic challenges. And particularly, you know, you mentioned the fridge work, which is led by many, you know, great mutual aid organizations who are, you know, who've spawned it, who know the need, who have the community voice, who have the community relationships. And so organizations like ours see it as extremely important and core to the work that we're doing in the food space.
Great, thank you. There have also been a lot of new alliances and new partnerships and flat out new models that have been created over the past year. Could you say a little bit about how there have been any opportunities to create new alliances or partnerships that you might not have considered in the past, and what those partnerships have looked like? And I'll start with you on this one, Ben.
Sure. Well, first of all of our partnerships have come through the pandemic. So I don't know if I can necessarily compare them to prior, but what I can say is that people are looking for ways to connect and ways to serve. And one of the partnerships I'd love to highlight is ours with the Food Recovery Network. This is a community of almost 4,000 students at 240 college chapters around the country who are focusing on in-person food recovery. So doing what they can to help rescue food from the dining halls, the restaurants, and other local establishments near their campuses. And as a result of the pandemic, many of them were sent home with not a lot of ways to engage in the ways that they previously had. Farmlink being digital allowed a lot of Food Recovery Network members to join and support what we've been doing. And I think showed the opportunity that exists throughout the food rescue space, which is just aggregating the efforts that are occurring and doing what we can to support each other in ways that compound the output. In similar ways, we've worked with other food rescue groups who may not have the transportation infrastructure to be stretching across state lines, or maybe a certain amount short on funding programs to help support farmers who are trying to learn how to plant more than commodity crops. And doing what we can to partner with other organizations who are working in the food waste and food recovery spaces is something that I think people are increasingly open to, and is an important part about in taking some larger steps towards change.
Great. And Matt, I know you essentially shifted your model over the past year in a really noteworthy and in a way that actually got quite a bit of press. Can you say a little bit about what that's looked like?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same. It's kind of different. We still do the old thing too, but we, we just really realized, like, me as a cook, I realized that restaurants had the ability and the power, and we were looking at COVID and when it was coming, working with small restaurants, we've just gotten better and better at it. It's teams, it's people who know how to cook together, which I think is like it's the same thing at the community center. It's people that understand each other, that know each other's name, that know where to set up the tent. Like, all of these things are like really, really, really important. And when we talk about our partnerships at Rethink, like, we've learned so much from Chamber of Commerce and local leadership in Chinatown that's helped us choose and select business. Like, there's a real opportunity to combine, because it's all one problem, right? Like, it's all one problem. There's a real opportunity to kind of utilize philanthropy in the small business space as an investment into these businesses to cater their local community centers, give the dollars to the people in the neighborhood for the neighborhood so that they want to do the work, they're doing the work anyway, and then help empower the community center that way. So we've learned a lot. We've really learned a lot in the last year and a half, and we're super grateful for everybody we've met along this journey.
Great. And I was curious if the panelists wouldn't mind sharing maybe one or two ideas that you've heard or come across during the past year that have really caused you to reevaluate or rethink your work. Something that just sort of struck you as interesting, that sort of caused a bit of a paradigm shift in your mind.
For the foundation, we having lived experiences in some of these challenges, personally have benefited, I personally have benefited from the great work that nonprofits are doing in the food space. And I think where we had sort of an aha moment the early part of the pandemic was the fact that we're obviously focused on so many different areas, whether it's housing, small business, food, the digital divide. All of these areas really are interconnected. And so when I hear Ben talk about the digitization of his platform and the fact that they're very digital, and then solving the food security challenge, for us, we connected all of those dots and trying to figure out how do we marry all of these various different needs and solutions together to really then partner with organizations to uplift some of this work that we're doing. And so connecting the needs of our residents for food and digital equity together really starts to be powerful. Connecting food and housing need together starts to become a lot more powerful. And so that was a big aha moment for us when we were having all these different collaborative discussions with organizations, and food was like a common theme across all of these different organizations. And so now we're sort of introducing housing groups and small business groups and mutual aid organizations and all of these groups into sort of more collaborative discussions. And we're finding more innovative things are coming out of those collaborations and ideas are coming out of those collaborations. So that was like a sort of a pretty, I guess, monumental sort of thought process for us. And now that drives forward our vision as an organization on making sure that we connect these dots. And we call it Concentric Circle sort of strategy that we're implementing.
We call the exact same thing being an aggregator. And
yeah.
I think it's a very similar premise. One idea, which is a little bit of a pivot, is that we've been working on for a few months now, is considering how we can continue to add more value to the people who are participating in the charitable food space. And so for us, that's the farmers and distributors. And one area we've chosen to focus is there are millions of dollars left on the table by farmers participating in the charitable food space in tax credits and deductions. And very few farmers that I've worked with know they even exist. And even fewer are equipped to really connect all the dots such that they could access these credits and deductions. It's convoluted, it's not really made readily available. And so what we're trying to do is provide all of the information for them so that they can submit for these deductions and credits. This is to the amount of millions of dollars for even the food that we moved last year. And when we talk about adding value, it's because you actually need a lot of the information from the recipient organization in order to connect all the dots and submit for these credits and deductions. And so that's one of the, I suppose, ideas that we've been working on, is figuring out how we can take all this information that we already have access to and just make it even more convenient for the farmers in this instance to be receiving more money back into their pockets.
I think that's brilliant. And we keep trying to figure that out with restaurants, because it's like 25% up to 5 years, like pass it forward up to 5 years in the CARES Act. It's like, if we could figure out a way, what I think would be like super fascinating, if we found like a way that, you can sell carbon credits, if you could sell tax deductions in a marketplace, as taxes continue to go up, and you could buy a $50,000 food tax deduction for $25,000 because it's available, it's for sale in a marketplace. If we could figure out how to do that, that would drive sustainability so quickly in the right direction. But small businesses, we have the same problem. They don't know how to use it, and we don't have the bandwidth to train everybody.
Thanks. So we have a lot of folks in the audience who are either funders or from the government or work at other nonprofits. One of the things that comes up a lot in conversations among funders is around how to appropriately empower on-the-ground organizations, such as the ones that the three of you represent, helping folks scale their work without being overly heavy-handed or without being overly paternalistic. I know that this has historically been a problem in philanthropy, and I hope that this opportunity, a lot of what we've seen out of the last year, is a real chance to sort of rethink what that could look like. And I'm curious, given your experience working with funders, working with government, if there are any methods in particular that you've found especially helpful at empowering your organizations without being too dictatorial.
I don't know, Raj, do you really want me to answer that one? No.
Let it ride.
I think that foundations need to play a bigger role. Especially the big ones. They need to start being more helpful, more trusting, less skeptical. I love Robinhood. Raj, you've coached me through a lot of stuff, and Bayam, who sadly is no longer with Robinhood, has been a huge supporter. But I think a foundation, in my mind, should be a partner. And Robinhood's been really good at that, especially with Rethink, especially through the pandemic. But a lot of this kind of old submit 6 pages of grant, wait, $25,000 now spend. It doesn't help anybody at all. And so it needs to stop, and we need to start thinking about why we have this process and why we do these things. And nobody gets in philanthropy to get rich. Everybody is here because they're like really, I love food, I love restaurants, I love people, and so that's why I do what I do. But there just needs to be a higher level of trust. And that's why I think private donors have come out of the woods and just crushed it. They did a good job. They found people that they believed in. I had big donors that, I'd call at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock on a Thursday night and say, hey, I thought we were going to get up to 50 restaurants by this day, and I don't think we're going to do it. And they're like, it's fine. What do you need? Do you need this? Do you need that? And that's been really great. Boards got people through the pandemic. And yeah,
I mean, just, as a foundation ourselves, this is core to what our vision is and how we operate, which is, organizations that are on the ground, grassroots, doing the work, really know how to measure best what they're doing. And really, we need to ensure that they're allowed to do that, and they're allowed to really, set their own goals and set their own vision, and without a heavy-handed sort of a metric-driven sort of process. And so, for us as a foundation, through all of our grant making, we were very clear that we want to work with those organizations who are receiving the funding. We're not just going to give a grant and then walk away. We are very much working alongside those organizations to uplift the work that they're doing and really provide capacity to them, right? Because that's really truly what I think many organizations need. They don't need to be told how to measure what they're doing. They need the support and capacity to continue to do the great work they're already doing. And so core to the vision of our foundation is to be a partner alongside a grant to ask more questions. What else can we do from a technical assistance standpoint? What else can we do to connecting you to other funders to support the work that you're doing? And so we really believe the local grassroots organizations know best. And we're very, we subscribe to the notion you've described, Raj, that local, hyper-local organizations really should be given the autonomy as best as possible to do the good work. And I think COVID showed us that. COVID showed us what we already knew, but sort of shone a light on how localized this should be. And so grassroots institutions should be given that runway to be able to be successful in that way.
If every organization thought about it the way Desmond just laid out, so much more change would happen. But I find that many of the organizations we partner with will partner with us to the extent that they can brand it, and that's it, without realizing that there's so many more ways that they could be making a change just by introducing us to people that we know that are right there. And even when it comes to food organizations that we've worked with, a few have been perfect partners, and so many more have said, all right, we'll give you a pallet of food and we'll get some photographers to the food bank. And that's not doing anything to make systemic change. That's barely even making a dent at the weekly food bank line that we're serving. And so figuring out ways that we can be challenging these organizations to make promises that are beyond what one pallet of food is going to do, or even one pallet of a sugary carbonated beverage. That's almost an insult to the food bank that we're getting it to. And we've gotten to the point where we're not even sure if it's always the right move to be moving it. So I think that going and approaching the organization that you're supporting as a funder and asking, what my resources are, what can we do to help you? And then really taking into consideration what the ask is. I think that's the best way to make an impact as a donor.
Not agree more. I could not agree more. And I think that if the organizations that have even this group with our scale, so maybe it's time to start saying no. Maybe next time that Bank X comes up and says, we'll give you $25,000 for a photo shoot, it's time to be nope, go somewhere else. Because there are some really amazing corporations, and we have a great partnership with Goldman Sachs, and they're really in it. They put me through the 10,000 Small Businesses program. They help fundraise for us. They've helped me in a lot of ways. But we've had some struggles with funders in the past, and it's I think it's time to start saying no.
And what's tough is, I think for systemic change to occur, a lot of the largest players in the spaces that we occupy are going to need to make systemic or substantial change. And eventually we're going to have to approach them and say, this, and this, these practices are wrong, or these practices are what creates the problems that we're trying to deal with. And so to a certain extent, it's almost enabling that same process to occur again and again when we receive the donation, allow them to say that they're doing what they are to fight food insecurity, and move on to the next day.
I also think the community is holding them more accountable, which we should be, right? And I think funders are going to start to see, and we've seen this already, that if even with their metrics and trying to measure it, if the way that they're approaching it, I think some of them are starting to see that they just won't be successful because the community just won't stand for it. And that's that sort of is a very positive change that we've seen in the last sort of 12 months.
The rejection of the gift food program. It was a disaster. It was a complete disaster, the gift food program. And communities just straight up rejected it. Chinatown, where we did a lot of our work over COVID, straight up did not want it. And the sad thing is that the city of New York thinks that somehow meant that they were successful. And so when they look at it, they say, wow, demand went down. They don't really need it anymore. But it was, just such a horrible time, but also, I'm a big believer in people, and such an inspiring time to see restaurants and people just do the work that needed to be done, regardless of how it was going to get figured out. It was, I hope I never have to go through that ever again, but it was something else.
If we're firing shots, I saw a question in the chat about what policy or what governmental change would need to occur. Look at the USDA Farm to Family Food Box program that occurred last year. The government, it bailed out billions of dollars worth of food from farms that were struggling, but it also asked huge food groups to distribute at scale to the charitable food organization in a way that they never have before. And at Farmlink, we saw a lot of issues with that because the same groups, the same food banks that have never really had an issue with getting enough food, got enough food, and the same food banks that fall through the cracks continue to fall through the cracks. And so I think that's an example of, okay, 4 billion meals were provided by the government. But again, the second that funding stopped, there's no one who's really better off for it, except for the farms who avoided bankruptcy, which for some of those farms was objectively a good thing, but there's far better uses for that money than the way it seems like it was applied.
And I'm curious if folks on the panel have other thoughts around specific policy changes, either at the city, state, or federal level, that would be especially helpful with this type of with the work that you do.
I feel like I'm taking up a lot.
No, please, Ben, go for it.
We discussed some tax credits and deductions earlier, and there have been the question. Oh, sorry,
the question was just around. It was just sort of follow up to all the panelists around specific policies that would be helpful for addressing food insecurity at the city, state, or federal level.
I think if we could better incentivize people to participate in the charitable food space and make it easier for them to donate their food than to throw it away, we'd be doing a lot of good. Where currently some places are exploring fining farms more for throwing away the food. If that same incentive were flipped to in a way that they were positively incentivized for donating it, it helps the farmer directly and is going to get more food to people who need it. So I think that a lot of policy could be improved with better incentivizing that. Some states are doing it really well with offering credits right now, but the federally enhanced tax deduction is not doing enough to really overcome the cost that farmers are facing when they're losing their food.
One question that's come up both in the chat and through the question and answer function is around stigmatizing folks who utilize the food system and a lot of the challenges that come with that. And oftentimes that is that can be funder driven, that can be done by organizations to increase their publicity. Are there ways in which your organizations are working to destigmatize receiving food, and ways in which you've tried to reframe that?
I'll take that because this is something that we talk about. We've talked a lot about at Rethink all the time when we think about it. We don't do any images of recipients or anything like that. It's all, if you see people on our website, they're people who are distributing food, helping without being part of a solution and being part of something positive. But it's hard because it's also what we see from large competitors. Like if you go to like the largest food distributors websites and you look at their websites, it's all you're going to see all over their website. And also when you look at metrics and how people count things, they'll say stuff like, oh, 1 million pounds and that was 1 million meals, and it's confusing to what it actually is. And like, that's just like, sadly, very sadly, the food insecurity game. But Rethink has taken a strong stance. We used to say culturally sensitive, but now we say culturally celebrative. We want to celebrate food. We want to style people out and have a great time. And like, we're sorry if you can't be there, like we want to make this a positive thing. It's why, Daniel Hume has done such an amazing job for us. It's not really, yes, he makes 1,000 meals a week. He does an amazing job getting food out there, but it's about quality. It's the best chef in the entire city making food for people. And that's what we're about. Like, we're about that love.
Yeah, and I think as a foundation, we are strictly against any sort of exploitation of this process. And I think this comes back to the community-owned, community-led, community-driven vision. And that, if our community members are the ones that are out there deciding where food is being distributed, how funding is being procured, who we provide resources to, I think a lot of that grassroots-led decision-making and participation will ultimately, go a long way in making sure that this stigma against receiving food, ultimately it gets eradicated, because that's ultimately what our goal is. And really, that's fundamentally what we should be doing, because our family members, our grassroots organizations are the one doing the work. And so fundamentally, that's just how it has to be. And as an organization, we are squarely aligned and sided with all of those views.
Thank you. We also have another question about shifting to post-pandemic life. How do you see your platforms adjusting or continuing to grow as we move beyond sort of some of the immediate emergencies of the pandemic, while recognizing full well that there are going to be some real ongoing challenges and issues that existed long before the pandemic that have only gotten worse over the past year plus?
I'll explain that from the Rethink side. And it's why I'm excited to connect with Desmond in the chat too, because I think we could really collaborate on something around this. But we as a Rethink and our board made a conscious decision that we were going to go kind of all out, and really we had some reserves, we had some cash backed up. We were just going to do everything we could this year and finish strong. And so as we get out of COVID, we're looking at kind of separating our program in two separate ways with Rethink Certified. One part of our program means that you've contributed around $50,000 of in-kind value to Rethink in some way. And that can be cash, that can be meals for your local community center, and that could be a bunch of things, mainly focused for brands and other things like that. And then we want to build what we've done, and where we saw the most amount of success with our program was, the small business incubator, or whatever, we haven't really settled on a name, where we look at how much cash we have left for the year. And we basically say, you're going to cater your community center for a year, and we're going to pay you 50 or 30% of that up front, so you can get through capital expenditures, you can build your business, and then we'll tranche it out throughout the rest of the year. But you have to hit these meal goals for your local community center. And then when we talk to the community center, we're going to say, we're going to cater your community center for 1 year, just 1 year, that's all we got. And over the course of the year, we want you to think about how do you use your small business to actually, to get food for your programs and stuff like that, to try to help build the relationship. That's where we've seen Rethink be most successful in the pandemic, is strong relationships between CBOs and restaurants that are starting to exist without us, which is what we want. And that's the way that we're going to kind of look going forward.
From a community foundation standpoint, we fundamentally believe that immediate relief, to your point, Raj, is still around. So we are still working to ensure that need and working with organizations to make sure that need is met. But we have sort of three other core things that we're doing coming out of the pandemic, off sort of extension from that work. One is economic development, and so looking at how do we bring more sort of employment related food activity into the borough? How do we look at entrepreneurial activities around that? Because we truly believe our community in the Bronx is a diverse entrepreneurial community. And so how do we build economic development around, food entrepreneurship and food employment? The other thing is around, looking at systems, supply chains, and system structures. And so again, how do we leverage logistics? We have one of the largest food distribution centers in the world right in the Bronx. We have networks that come in through the Bronx or go through the Bronx. So how do we leverage some of those logistics and system structures? And then the third thing is around community land use. And so how do we look at ways in which we can make use of urban agriculture, uplift organizations that are focused on urban agriculture, and start, growing our own food, more of our own food. There's a lot of growth already happening in the Bronx, but how do we grow more of our own food and develop our own programs locally, and then build commerce off the back of that? And then we're also looking to still work with restaurants to connect, similar to what Matt was describing, connect restaurants to produce distribution and see how we can continue to support that, which was work we were already doing as a part of the pandemic. So it's basically building more infrastructure and building more sustainable solutions that we designed as a part of the pandemic in a post-pandemic world.
For us, post-pandemic is we need to reconcile with the fact that a lot of the volunteers we've had contribute so much time to us since April are either going to go off into the world with jobs or go back to school where in-person expectations will require a lot more of their time. So what we hope to do is adjust what it takes to be a full-time volunteer at Farmlink so that it can be maintained by somebody who does have those commitments and allows us to continue to run and grow and enable these volunteers to learn about what we're doing and develop the skills to hopefully keep moving on in the world and looking for areas where they can make change. To one of Desmond's points, and then to a really true statement in the chat, moving food to a food bank as the sole extent of an organization is a Band-Aid solution. Because again, as the chat says, it's not going to do anything once that funding stops. And what we're trying to do is get to a point where we can move food sustainably at net zero cost. Right now, we've been really fortunate to have a lot of support for our organization, which has given us plenty of runway. But if we want to scale to move from 30 million pounds a year to 300, it's going to require some serious change. What we hopefully will be able to do in the future is rally this young voice that we've been able to aggregate to fight for policy change and to then hopefully get the organizations who we've been able to partner with on board to challenge them to be better and to contribute better to improving this space.
Thank you. I know we're coming up on time here. And there have been such amazing comments, both in the Q&A and the chat, that unfortunately we haven't had the chance to get to all of them. But I'd like to close by asking our panelists to do two things. One, to let folks know where and how they could volunteer with your organizations, because that's one of the questions that's come up. And two, to say a little bit about what gives you hope. This has been a very, very challenging year, and the culmination of a lot that had happened even before the pandemic, and unfortunately there are going to continue to be challenges. Is there anything in particular, either big or small, that has really kept you going? I will start with Ben.
This entire experience has given me an immense amount of hope. The slogan for Farmlink is actually harvesting hope. I have it on a pair of sweatpants right there. And but the reality is, when we started Farmlink last April, I never expected that we would create a sense of community that has persisted and grown in a way that it has over the last 14 months, where there were members who lost family to COVID, who lost jobs, who had to move because they could no longer afford to be where they were previously living. And throughout that entire experience, Farmlink was able to be a sense of community for so many people who lost that. Beyond that, being able to see the communities that we've been working with, the farmers we've developed relationships with, it gives a sense of hope that enough people want to see improvement here, and enough people will want to see improvement when they're provided the information that they have never been given before, that I really do believe change can occur.
And how to volunteer?
How to volunteer? Well, we just finished our onboarding for the summer. We brought on 80 new volunteers yesterday, but hopefully in the next few weeks, if people want to hop on and join us for a power hour, get on the phone with some farmers directly, we'll be able to sign up directly through our website, which I imagine will be shared, but it's the farm www.farmlinkproject.org. Thank you, Raj.
Thanks. Matt?
It's like we always talk about, Raj, I gotta say people, like for sure, like every people in all different spaces, from super wealthy people to community center leader people to chefs to random like athletes and people who went out to want to promote us, to beer companies like Sierra Nevada who continuously dropped off beer at our offices throughout COVID, which was very kind of them. You know, like all those little things, these gestures, watching people be creative and collaborate has been like, it's been the most proud I've ever been to be in food. So people have been amazing. And I do have to give my little shout out to Sanitation Foundation for putting this all on. And Sanitation Foundation is an organization that's also run by donations. So, you know, if you want to reach out and donate to help convene more things like this as well.
Desmond?
Sure. I think what's shown us, particularly in the Bronx, is that we've seen more in the last 12 months major steps towards solving the systemic challenges we face and the collaboration, most importantly, of organizations across the community than we've seen in many, many years. And that really is what really brings us hope, because we do believe we've identified, and organizations that are doing the work have identified solutions, real solutions that are obtainable now through those collaborations, through working with each other to solve those solutions. And so we still are some ways away from really solving these systemic challenges, but we're closer than we've ever seen before. And that's really because there's been a grassroots movement to collaborate amongst ourselves to try to move the needle in the right direction. So that is extremely exciting for us, and really just what we hear a lot from organizations that we work with. And then in terms of volunteering, you can reach us at info@thebronx.org, and you can work with us. We have a number of volunteer opportunities, and we also act as an intermediary for other organizations who may need volunteers, that we can put people in touch with who may need help. And thank you as well, Raj, and Sanitation Foundation for the opportunity to speak.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the Sanitation Foundation. Thank you, Desmond, Matt, and Ben. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.